Is this on? Can you hear me? Oh, good. Tavis, did you get it ahead of time? Did you get it ready ahead of time? Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. Apparently, this is my assistant today. Would you go sit over there with Grandma? All right, welcome to our week 6 of Wait What? And one more reminder, because next week's too late. If it's not on your calendars, get in your calendars. Friday night, October 21st is the all-church hayride at Pumpkin Creek Farms. Okay, so hope to see you there. These are some of my grandkids that are here visiting today. And if you haven't met my son Josh, some of you know him from a long time ago, and some of you haven't seen him in a long time. Some of you have never met him. So he's around here with his lovely wife Katie today too. So I'm glad to have them here. Okay, before we start, Andrew, would you open in prayer for us today?
Let us pray. Lord God, thank you for this time that we had together in church, for your word preached. I'm thankful for John's class. And I know we all have questions sometimes on your word, and we like to dig deeper and understand. But Lord, that we have faith and that you give us that we can come to you without question and just know that you love us and that you have a plan for each of us, Lord. I'm thankful for that, and I pray for each one here today, Lord, and the struggles that we have in life, that we can find strength and peace and hope in your word. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Andrew. That was excellent. He's summarizing the Sunday school class there. Our verses for this class are from Isaiah 55, verses 8 and 9. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Right? So my point has been that if that is true, and we believe that it is true, then when we're reading Scripture, we're excited the fact that God has revealed these things to us. We wouldn't know these things if he didn't reveal them to us. And occasionally, even in the revelation we have, we aren't going to understand, or we're going to think, that's confusing to me. I wouldn't have necessarily have done it that way. I'm not sure why God did it that way. Well, that's because God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. We shouldn't expect that everything God would do is what we would do, because he's God. But we trust, as Andrew was saying, we do trust God. And that is a takeaway from this class, if nothing else. Okay, today I want to look at the rest of the book of Genesis, and we'll look at the time of the patriarchs, the founding of the nation of Israel, and the people that were the prime movers in terms of that chosen people of God. In Genesis chapter 11, we have these people listed here. Noah was the 10th generation after the creation, and jump down to the bottom, Abram is the 20th generation. And when we leave Genesis chapter 11, Terah, who is Abram's father, is living in Ur of the Chaldees, which is over here on the right-hand side on the far east. This upside-down U that you see here is called the Fertile Crescent. Over on the right, that's often referred to as Mesopotamia. And he's living there, and he decides to move. And he has 3 children. They're all boys. He has Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran has a son who his name you might recognize. His name is Lot. So before they move, Terah moves him. Haran dies. He's the youngest son, but he dies first. He dies in Ur. Terah moves his family up to the very top of the map here, which is in Padan Aram, to a town called Haran. Now, that's either a coincidentally named the same name as the son who died, or probably more likely there wasn't much there, and he moves in with all of his people and all of his flocks and everything, and creates a town and names it after his deceased son. So Terah spends the rest of his life in Haran. And this is where we find Abram at the beginning of chapter 12. He's living in Haran with Nahor, his brother, and Lot, who is his nephew. All right. Yes?
Is that modern Syria?
That would be, yes. That would be in Syria. Mm-hmm. It would be probably out towards the borderlands between Syria and Turkey, which is where some of the Kurds live in that area there today. So Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3 says this. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be blessed. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now this is known as the Abrahamic covenant, the promise that God made to Abraham, and it's repeated in sort of different forms several different times in Genesis, but this is the first time it's said. And the land that Abram travels to is the land over on the west side, to the left side of this picture here. And that land is the land which often we refer to it as the promised land, because it was land that God promised to Abraham and his descendants. Sometimes you hear people call it the Holy Land, but today it's the nation of Israel. So that's the promised land there. Now, I was saying last week, one of the things that I thought was odd was that God would choose a people. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, but before I do that, I want to see, was there anything, if any of you looked at any of this week, or thinking about what you remember about the rest of the book of Genesis, is there anything about the stories that are found there that surprises you? Okay, Jared.
Just looking at it this week a little bit, later on in the Genesis, when Abram says to Sarah, tell them you're my sister so they don't kill me and take her. That's always been a wait, what for me, you know, like just, but just thinking about the culture this week, it kind of made me think that obviously the pagan nations, that was a common occurrence, and they've probably seen that happen all the time. But then it got me thinking, like, that actually is what one of the most righteous kings did with Sheba. He did the very same thing, what Abram was fearing, you know, later down the road. So if a righteous king is even tempted by doing that, how much more of a pagan king?
You're talking about David. Yeah. Okay, good. That's a wait. If you have never read that part before, that's a bit of a surprise. Anything? Let's go through them one at a time. The patriarchs, the first one was Abram, whose name becomes Abraham. We'll get to that in a minute. But anything about Abram's life that surprises you? Let's go to Isaac. Anything about Isaac? He's probably the one we know the least about, isn't it? Did you think about that? You can almost tell me nothing about Isaac. Okay, Isaac.
He had one favorite son was Esau.
He had a favorite son. He did have a favorite son, and his wife had a different favorite son. He was what? Yes, that's good. That is one story about Isaac that is, he says to his father, so there's a story about how God tells Abram to sacrifice Isaac. So they go to Mount Moriah, I guess, and Isaac says, we've got the fire, we've got the wood, but where is the sacrifice? And Abram doesn't say, it's you, but he says, God will provide. And God does provide. It's very prophetic, actually. But Abraham at this point is an old man, and he ties up Isaac and puts him on the altar. I might have been wrestling, Dad. What are you doing? But he was willing to do that. Yeah.
Imagine him saying it'll hurt me more than it does you.
Oh. Yes.
Can't you also kind of relate far-fetched maybe, but Abraham willing to give up his son where God gave up his son?
Yeah, Abraham was willing and didn't have to, and God was willing and did. Yeah, that's a good point.
The dilemma for Abraham, it was through Isaac, his descendants of his name, and then he's going to sacrifice Isaac upon the altar.
Yeah,
It says in Hebrews that he knew God could
raise him from the dead.
That's what he's thinking.
Yeah, he must have believed that that's what actually was going to happen because the promise was through Isaac. Yeah, Tim.
To add to that, Isaac, when you read that on the surface, you think, oh, he's a little boy. But if I'm not mistaken, he was like in his 30s.
I'm not sure his age, but
But I'm pretty sure he was.
right, you kind of picture it.
A full-grown man.
He's just a little 12-year-old or something, 10-year-old or something.
And that's to me, that's always been.
Wow.
The same thing.
All right, let's go on to Jacob. Anything about Jacob? Okay.
The fact that Jacob
God choose Jacob?
That is a really good question. Esau, he's mad, and he does sell his birthright, but how does Esau respond when Jacob comes home?
He accepts.
Oh, he's accepting to him. He's happy to have him back. He does behave in a way that we would think is pretty moral. And Jacob, on the other hand, it's a little questionable.
How do you wrestle with God?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is a good question. Most of us do it mentally. It doesn't sound like this was mental. This sounds like he had a physical wrestling match with a physical being, and because even at the end he touches him on the hip, and so it seems like it was a real thing. But I don't understand that. But
He was physically injured from that.
yeah, he's physically injured from it. Okay, yes, Dan.
Despite being a favorite son and seeing all that caused, he had a favorite son.
Yes, he had a favorite son. Yes, he did. His favorite son was Joseph, who he gave a coat of many colors, right? That might not have been the brightest move. What about the kids? What about Jacob's kids? Anything about them? That's it, kind of like the last 10 chapters of Genesis.
Hatred for the dreamer.
What's that? Hatred for the dreamer. But his dreams turned out to be pretty accurate.
Bumpy road on the way, though.
It was a bumpy road on the way, and it took a long time for all that stuff to occur. Okay, let's look at this in a little bit more detail. I was saying that that I thought it was that I showed you the poem last week. It's out of God to choose the Jews, and I'll say again, the man that wrote that was an anti-Semite, so I won't even tell you his name, but I think it was odd that God would choose a particular group of people, because any group of people that you choose is going to have people in it that are going to be human, and they're going to have all kinds of sins. And these people were no exception. So it wasn't that it was odd that he specifically chose the children of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob as his special people, but that he chose any special people at all. You have all pointed out that there was a lot of deception going on in these chapters. And I'll just go through some of the ones, and you've mentioned several of these already. Abram deceives Pharaoh. How did Abram deceive Pharaoh? Yeah, that's when he said that his Sarai, she was at that point, he said that she was his wife. She said it was his sister, which was halfway true, but it was a half lie. And so Pharaoh takes Sarai to be in his harem, I guess, and God prevents anything from happening there. But Abram does get his wife back, but he's not straightforward with Pharaoh at that time. You think he learned his lesson, right? No. Later on, Abraham, he's got a new name now, but he deceives Abimelech, who's the king of the Philistines. We don't know whether Abimelech is the guy's name or a title. Because later on, there's another Abimelech, and it's probably not the same guy, but it could be a son or a grandson, named with the same name, or it could be the title again. How does Abraham deceive Abimelech? Same way. This is 30 years later, but he says the same thing. He says, she's my sister. And Abimelech goes, hot dog, and he takes her for his harem. And then again, God protects her. Abraham sure didn't, but God did, and Abraham gets her back, but he's deceiving, at least in this way. Somebody question? Yes?
More of a comment. Doesn't this kind of show that the aging process was a little bit different back then? Because Sarah is now 30 years older and is still attractive enough for Abram to have to lie. It's usually
You're hitting on what is probably my most... I know it's trivia, but it's probably the most surprising thing to me in the whole story. So I'll come back to that, yes.
If you think about what Abram did, at that time, in each of those moments, he made a decision from which, humanly speaking, there's no going back. This is a guy that God chose. And humanly speaking, we would look at him and say, God's made a grave, grave mistake in the man that he's chosen. I mean, that's the way I view this anyway. And so humanly, Abram twice made decisions that should have thwarted God's plan entirely. Just completely obliterated what God promised Abram in terms of making him a nation with that wife.
But
And so, you know, when I look at this story, I see the absolute impossibility of what God has promised coming into fruition. Because if it was dependent on a human being to any degree to keep that covenant, to honor the covenant, not just to keep it, but to honor it in any way, Abram failed immediately.
yeah, this child had to come through Sarai.
And so when I look at that, you know, there's some meaning in that for me. I look at myself
Well,
and realize God's made a covenant.
God intervened.
Absolutely impossible for me as a sinful human being I can't even really truly honor that covenant. It's not, I lack that capacity.
Thank goodness for the Holy Spirit. Okay. Isaac deceives Abimelech. Probably not the same Abimelech. This is many, many years later. What does Isaac do? Same thing. Good answer. He's married to Rebekah, and he says, it's my sister. Yeah, my sister. Now, this Abimelech doesn't take Rebekah, but he's looking out the window later on, and he goes, hey, they're awful chummy for brother and sister. And so he calls him in, he calls him on it. And so Isaac is deceiving here. All right, keep going. Jacob, and certainly I got to include Rebekah here. They deceive Isaac. How did they deceive Isaac?
Well, putting goat skins on Jacob's arms and getting the blessing from Isaac.
Yeah. Rebekah heard Isaac instructing Esau that if he go hunting and find some game and bring it back because he wanted him to serve him a meal and then he would bless him. And so she gets it into her head that the blessing needs to go to Jacob. Now, she had a prophecy before the children were born that the older would serve the younger. So, but still, she's very deceiving here. And so she goes in and she says, Jacob, you need to do this. Just follow my instructions here. You need to put, wool all over your arms so you'll be hairy like your brother. And I'll make up something from the flock, and we'll make it taste like it's gamey, and it'll be great. It'll be fine. And he's not like fully on board with this at first, but she talks him into it, and it works. They deceive Isaac. Yes.
You see a trend here? Deception. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all deceivers.
Well, it's in nature.
Well, I know. But it's like the father.
It's like father, like son, right?
Father, like son. Yeah.
Okay. Now, they're not the only. Remember, Laban is. You don't know Laban. The son that was left behind, Nahor, he was left behind up in Haran. He has some grandchildren, and one of them's name is Laban, and one of them's name is two of them. Three grandchildren. One of them is Laban that we know of, and one's Rachel and one's Leah. And Laban deceives Jacob concerning Leah and Rachel. What's that about?
He gave Leah, or he gave Leah when he was supposed to give Rachel.
Yeah, Jacob shows up, nothing, penniless, but he says, I'm willing to work, and he sees Rachel, and she's beautiful. By the way, these women are all beautiful. Every one of them, except for maybe Leah. And he sees Rachel, and she's beautiful, and he says, I will work 7 years for Rachel. And it says, it was as if it was no time at all. He was so in love. He's just, wow. So he works 7 years, and they come to the wedding ceremony, and she's wearing a veil and the whole thing. And he wakes up the next morning, and it's Leah. He's like, ah! And he says to Laban, what are you thinking? And he says, we have a custom in my country. Did I forget to mention this? We have a custom. The oldest daughter has to be married first. It might have slipped my mind. So he says, I'll tell you what, work for another 7 years, and you can have Rachel too. So he marries Rachel right away and has to work another 7 years, and he works another 6 years after that. So he's there for 20 years working for Laban. Laban also tries to deceive Jacob over his pay. We don't necessarily know the specifics of this, but we know that when Jacob leaves and Laban chases after him, Jacob says, you changed my pay over and over and over and over again, and God kept making it work out so that it worked in my favor. But if it had been up to you, I would have left penniless. Rachel deceives Laban over the household idols. What's that about?
Hides him in a camel, on a saddlebag.
Yeah. She says when they left without any notice, they left Laban without any notice. Somebody, not saying who, but somebody stole the household idols. Well, it was Rachel, and she had it under her saddlebag that she was sitting on, and so they're checking everything in the tent, and they can't find them, but she had them there. Simeon and Levi deceived the men of Shechem. I'm not going to go into the details of this one. If you don't know the story, it's in chapter 34. Read it. Okay. Ouch. That's all I can say. Simeon and Levi deceived the men of Shechem and end up killing a bunch of men. And then Joseph's brothers deceived Jacob. How did they deceive Jacob? Yeah, they put blood on the coat. They didn't say. It's one of those things. We didn't say that Joseph's dead. We said, we found this coat, and look, we found blood on the coat, and see if you think it might be our beloved son, brother Joseph's coat. And they're going, and they're leading Dad by the hand to conclude that Joseph's been killed by wild animals. So they were successful in deceiving their father. There is a lot of inbreeding going on. Did you notice that as you go through the stories? So Abram is married to Sarai, who is his half-sister. We know that because it says this in Genesis 20:12. Behold, this is Abram talking. 12? Abraham at this point. She is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, Terah, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. So is it a lie to say it's his sister? It is his sister, but, the main relationship was spousal, I think, and he was hiding that fact. Okay, so Abraham is married to Sarai, his half-sister. Isaac marries Rebekah, his first cousin once removed. Okay, so Isaac, you remember the story about how Abram sends a servant back up to Haran to see if he can bring a wife for Isaac, because he doesn't want Isaac to leave. So Isaac doesn't get to go choose his own wife. So the servant goes up there. He goes to Nahor's household, and Nahor has a granddaughter named Rebekah. And so Isaac's father's brother's granddaughter. See, so its first cousin would be here, and this is one notch down. So it's first cousin once removed. And that's who he marries, and he loves her, and she's beautiful, and he loves her. Never saw her ahead of time. Jacob marries Leah and Rachel. They are his first cousins. So Jacob's mother is Rebekah, and Rebekah's brother is Laban, and Laban's daughters are Leah and Rachel. So they're first cousins. So this is all some of the inbreeding that is going on in the family. All right, now let's go to, I want to talk about the blessings and the birthright. Yes?
Before you go there.
Okay.
One of the classes, wait, what? So this whole thing to me is like, wait, what? And so can you just give a quick, how does this all make sense? And,
why were they allowed to do this? There was no restriction from this at this point. It wasn't until the law came along that you were restricted from marrying too close, the family that was too close. So there was no restriction, and it was very common in families to keep the money and the wealth. You married for two reasons: to keep the money in the family and to marry on to another family and bring their wealth into your family. So it wouldn't have been unusual for people to intermarry, and you married who you were close to. You know that even in the United States 150 years ago, most people, and by the vast majority of people, married somebody that grew up within 50 miles of where they lived. Why? Because people didn't travel that far. You didn't travel very far. Who are you going to marry? You're going to marry close people. Who are the closest people to you? Your relatives. So it wasn't, and honestly, I think scientifically, I don't think there was a problem with it genetically, because the mutations hadn't built up to the point where you'd have double recessive problems with that kind of thing. But by the time you get to Moses and the law, which is another 400 to 600, maybe 400 years later, yeah, at that point they were like, don't be marrying your first cousin. And
Yeah,
Yeah. There's a common question. Who did Cain marry?
I mean, the Jews within themselves, they were falling apart as a nation, they were marrying one another.
Yes, and the Jews only married for the most part, only married other Jews. So they married within that family, but they could marry within their, outside the tribe. You could marry somebody of a different tribe, but you did marry another Israelite. Okay, birthright and, I'll talk about the birthright and the blessing. The birthright was in ancient cultures, there was always preference given to the firstborn male child. They were usually received a double inheritance. That means whatever was going to be split up among the children, they got twice as much. They led the family when the patriarch died, when the father died, and they would take care of the mother and any of the unmarried sisters. So that was their part of the responsibility. And they were basically in charge if dad was gone or if dad died. So they got the authority as well. Often in the Bible, the fathers would give a special blessing as well to the child who got the birthright. All right, so let's look. I want to look at, as I said, usually it's firstborn child. Abram has a child when we meet Abram, he's 75 years old. He comes into the promised land. 13 years pass and no children. And this is kind of interesting. What does Abram's name mean? Abram means exalted father. And the guy is 75 years old, and then by the time 13 more years pass, he's in his late 80s, he has no children. It must have been a joke every time he went to the 7-Eleven. Here comes Abram, exalted father. How's all the kids? He didn't have any kids. And so finally, Sarai says, this was a very common thing to do. She had a handmaiden who was an Egyptian, Hagar, and she says to her husband, take her and raise up a child for me as my own child. Abram doesn't object to this at all, apparently. And Hagar gets pregnant, and she has a boy whose name is Ishmael. All right, so he's the firstborn. Another 13 years go by, and now Abram is almost 199 years old. Sarai is 89 years old. God comes to Abram and renews his promise to him, and he says, by the way, I'm changing your name. You're not going to be called Abram anymore, you're going to be Abraham. So what does Abraham mean? Father of many nations. I can see Abram going, look, I just outgrew the old name, right? I mean, come on. I finally got a child, Ishmael. Now I'm the father of many nations. But this is what God told him that he was going to be called from this point on. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I was just curious, does the Bible say they never had children, or just that he has no children at that point? In other words, could they have had children? Could Abraham and Sarah have had children who died before?
You mean died in childbirth or maybe miscarriages or
as young people or whatever? I mean, when we enter the story, he basically says, my servant is going to be my heir.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean he never had it.
But it does say Sarah was barren. So that indicates that.
Could be, well, I mean, that
I mean, she could have had miscarriages, but
true.
yeah, Karen.
Did the original promise mention Sarah being the mother?
No, but this version of it, this later on version specifically says,
Right, but
yeah,
for all those years, they didn't.
yeah, he didn't know.
So that changes when he said she's my sister. He's not necessarily saying.
Well,
I will never have a child.
that was the first time, not the second time. Second time's after this. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so, God comes in some form and tells Abraham that he's going to have a child. It's going to be through Sarah, and she does have a child, and the child's name is Isaac. Is that the end of Abraham's children? No. This is surprising to a lot of people. Remember, Abraham is the father of many nations. So Abraham marries, after Sarai, when Abram's name is changed to Abraham, Sarai's name is changed to Sarah. And after Sarah dies, Abraham marries again, Keturah, and they have 6 more boys. And you recognize some of those names as some nations. So there are definitely many different nations that can tie their lineage back to Abraham. Which of these children was the child that got the birthright and got the blessing from Abraham and from God? It was Isaac, yeah, second born. All right, let's go to Isaac real quick. What does Isaac mean? It means laughter, or he laughs. I remember when I was young, a sermon where the pastor went on and on and on again about Sarah, and how Sarah didn't believe the Lord and didn't trust the Lord. And the passage, here's some verses. The Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women has ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself and said, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? Drop to the end. Lord said, why did Sarah laugh? Sarah denied it. I did not laugh. She was afraid. So she laughs. And so Isaac is named, laughter, or he laughs. Or I think, looking at this a little more carefully, that Sarah got a little bit of a bum rap here. Who else laughed? This is Genesis 18. This is Genesis 17. God said to Abram, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. So this is where she specifically has brought this in. I will bless her, and she shall become nations, kings of people shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed. So, okay, Sarah laughed, but so did Abraham. Yes?
Okay, so you're suggesting that that Isaac's name is tied to their sort of mocking.
I think it's more than that.
Possibility that it could be joyous.
Yes. And that's when the child is named, that's what actually Sarah says. She says, I have been, people will laugh with me and laugh for joy. So yes, so I think it's kind of both. I think it plays off the fact that they laugh, but also that then it was really a joyful thing that happened. Isaac marries Rebekah, and they have twins. And the first one born is Esau, and the second one born is Jacob. Esau is beloved by his father, and Jacob is beloved by the mother. Which one of these two receives what happens with the birthright? Esau sells it, right, for a porridge or something. Were you able to do that? I don't know, but he certainly looked at it with disdain. And but who got the blessing? There's no doubt. Jacob got the blessing here. Okay, Jacob. What does Jacob mean? Supplanter. Yeah, supplanter. It means the replacer. He replaced Esau. He snuck in and got the blessing and the birthright. And yes.
How are these names picked? Like, wouldn't Esau not be like, oh, like that's kind of scary that my brother's name's Supplanter?
Okay.
Like,
yeah. So there's a real question about timing here. The question is, did Jacob mean supplanter before Jacob lived? Or did his name take on the idea of supplanter because of the characteristics that Jacob showed in his life? See what I'm saying, the difference between those two things? And I think that's often the case. If you say this name means this name means this. I think often what you're seeing is the first person with that name had certain characteristics, and then that becomes characteristics associated with the name.
Then my counter is, then wouldn't Isaac not make sense then? Because she specifically named him that because of laughter. So
yeah.
Did she decide that Isaac now means laughter?
No, in that case, it seems like it was taken from a word that specifically referred to laughter. It could be either or, yeah. But with Jacob, that's in my notes right here, I'll show you. We just don't know which came first in this case. Okay, Jacob had a lot of kids. He was prolific. He had Reuben and Simeon and Levi and Judah. These were all from his wife Leah, the one that he didn't really want to marry. Rachel gets a little bit upset because she's not having any kids, so she pulls the trick that Sarah pulled. She gives her handmaiden Bilhah to her husband Jacob, and he doesn't seem to object to this. And she says, let her raise up children for me. And she has Dan and Naphtali. And then she stops having kids, and Leah sees what's going on and says, Well, if you two can play that game, she has a maidservant as well, whose name is Zilpah. And Zilpah becomes Jacob's wife, and Zilpah has Gad and Asher. And then finally, Rachel has a baby. And she has a baby. Oh, I'm sorry. Back up. Back to Leah. Leah has two more children, Issachar and Zebulun. And then finally, at this point, Rachel has a baby, and she has Joseph. Which one's the favorite child? Joseph. Jacob, at this point, he's gone up to Padan Aram, and he's living with his father-in-law. And he leaves in the dead of night, and he's coming back to the promised land. And as he's traveling back, there is a night, it's a very interesting passage where he has a night where he wrestles with God. And some of you were asking at the beginning, is that I think it's physical wrestling. Exactly what that involved, I don't know. Maybe it's, a lot of people think, well, it must have been a pre-incarnate Christ who came down in bodily form and wrestled with him. In any case, at that point, Jacob's name is changed to Israel, which means wrestles with God. And let me tell you, the children of Israel have wrestled with God ever since this time. They really have. So that's really where Israel comes from, because you look through the patriarchs, you don't see an Israel, but Jacob's name was changed by God to Israel. Later on, Rachel has one more child. So who's the last of the children? Benjamin. Yeah, Benjamin's the last one. Who gets the birthright and the blessing? Oh, good. I heard. That's a very good question. We'll come back to that. Joseph goes down. You know the whole story. He goes down to Egypt. He ends up marrying. I don't know that he had much choice. Pharaoh says, "You're marrying this lady." He goes, "Okay." He marries an Egyptian, and he has two children. The first one is Manasseh, and the second one is Ephraim. Who got the blessing? Yeah, we don't know about the birthright because it doesn't specifically say, but who got the blessing? Ephraim did. The secondborn got the blessing. You see, it's supposed to be the firstborn, right? Do you notice how many times the firstborn is not getting the blessing? Jacob is the one who does the blessing, and what does he do? Crosses his arms. And so he blesses the younger over the older. Okay, let's just real quick run through some more. In famous people in the Old Testament, right? Moses, obviously, you have to mention him, right? Was Moses firstborn? No, we know he wasn't, right? He was at least third. He has an older brother, Aaron, and an older sister, Miriam. So he's not the oldest. He's probably the second son in the family because we don't hear of anybody else. I keep seeing second son. Woo! Can you guess which one I am in my family? Hi, Mom. Mom's watching. All right. David. Right? David, you can't, the Old Testament, there's nobody probably more important in the Old Testament than David, and David is the 8th son in his family. So he's clearly the one who got everything. Everything important comes through David, and yet he's not the firstborn son. Okay, let's go back to Israel for a second. I heard both of these. Yes?
So where did that begin, the first son gets the blessing? Was that from God, or was that some first son somewhere saying, hey, I'm more important?
Yeah, it probably was just something that people did. It was just a ancient people type of thing, a tradition that people did. But if you look at the nation of Israel, you look further on, is there a time where firstborn are important? Kings, yeah, the kings. It was usually the firstborn who carried on. But when the nation was first formed, Passover, right? Who died? All the firstborn. Okay, so God says later on when he gives them the law, what does he say? He says, the firstborn of everything belonged to me. God said that. And so the animals, they had to sacrifice the firstborn male child. Well, what about the men? They had to redeem them. And what did they redeem them with? Yes, but The first time they were redeemed by Levites. The whole tribe of Levi was set apart as a redemption of the firstborn throughout the whole. They didn't have enough. There weren't enough Levites. It was almost the right number, but it wasn't the right number. What did they have to do? They had to make up the difference with sacrifices and things. So the firstborn became, and it became more articulated in the law later on, but this is just kind of how things were sort of done at this point. Now, when I asked who was the birthright and the blessing, who did they go to here? I heard both of these names. I heard from over here, I don't know who, I heard Judah, and over here I heard Joseph. I thought I knew the answer to this, and now that I've read it more and more times, I think I'm less sure now than I was before. Okay, so let me just show you. Nothing specifically says something about the birthright, but the blessing that we have, the blessings. We have Jacob blesses all of his children, and that's interesting because in some of the other things they would only bless the firstborn, but here. All of the children are given a blessing, but if you go to Genesis chapter 49, the blessings for most of Jacob's kids are like half a verse. There's like 20 words. But then you come to Judah, and there's like 6 verses. It says, Judah, your brother shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down. He crouched as a lion, as a lioness. Who dares rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine, and his vestures in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. I don't know what all that stuff at the end means, but there's a lot of words there. Is there anything there that makes it look like Judah's a little more important? Okay, yeah. The first verse up there, your brothers and sisters shall praise you. Doesn't say that for any of the other ones. Your father's son shall bow down before you. And then probably the most important, we all know this verse, verse 10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. Also, verse 9 says Judah is a lion's cub. How is Jesus referred to later on? Lion of the tribe of Judah. Right? So clearly there is some spiritual blessing that is going to follow right down the line of Judah all the way to Christ. That's got to be important. But Joseph, can't look at this. This is, again, most of them get one verse. Here's what it says about Joseph. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attack him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above and blessings of the deep that crouch beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents. Up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who is set apart from his brothers. Anything there that says that Joseph's special? Yeah, that whole last verse, right? The whole last verse. Yeah.
This might be getting ahead, but when the two kingdoms split, one's the tribe of Ephraim and the other's the tribe of Judah.
Yeah, the older tribe, the tribe in the north we usually refer to as the nation of Israel, but the main tribe in that northern kingdom was always Ephraim. Yeah. So is there a little bit of both going on here? Here's another thing. When you get to the actual nation, not the Genesis part here, but you actually get to the nation, there's 13 tribes. 13. And the Levites don't get any land. So take them out for a minute. So there's still 12 tribes. There's no tribe of Joseph. What do you have? Ephraim and Manasseh. So he got a double inheritance. Double inheritance. And remember what the firstborn was supposed to get? Double inheritance. And Joseph is the firstborn of the favored wife. So I'm not going to say I know for sure. It's possible that what you're looking at is one of them is getting the birthright and one of them is getting the blessing. right? It's clear that, and what's kind of odd to me was, go back to this thing about the scepter shall not depart from Judah. When this is said, what's important about Judah? Who's important? Yes, okay, looking into the future. But at the time that Jacob says this, who's the important character in the whole family? Joseph. He's basically king. If the brothers make him feel unhappy, they're dead, right? He is in control. He is the scepter. And yet Jacob looking at everything says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah. So that's prophetic, and clearly it is. And so I don't know, maybe I'm splitting hairs distinguishing between birthright and blessing, but maybe we have one of each here. But clearly both of these families, these tribes were the main tribes. If you look throughout the history of the nation of Israel, they are the main ones. All right, real quick. Okay, I want to talk about the promised land real quick. Yeah, we're running out of time. God made a covenant with Abram and told him the boundaries of the land that he was going to have. So the promised land. What I find interesting about the promised land is the relationship of the Jews to the promised land. So I want to just run through a few things with you. Genesis 12, Abraham enters the promised land. By the end of the chapter, he leaves the promised land. He goes to Egypt because of a famine. Genesis 13, he returns to the promised land. All right, Genesis 28, Jacob flees to Padan Aram to find a wife, supposedly to find a wife, but really to escape Esau. All right, in Genesis 31, Jacob returns to the promised land. Genesis 39, Joseph is sold into slavery and sent to Egypt. So he's out of the promised land. In 47, Jacob and his family go to Egypt. The whole group of them go to Egypt so that Joseph can protect them during the famine. Genesis 50, Jacob's sons, I don't know if you remember this, Jacob's sons all go to the promised land to bury Jacob. Then what do? They come back to Egypt. All right. The whole story of Exodus is basically God taking his people 400 years later out of Egypt and taking them to the promised land. All right. In 586 BC, what happens? Jerusalem is destroyed and the people are scattered. Most of them are taken off to Babylon. Ezra and Nehemiah, what happens? There's a trickle of people that start Jewish people, descendants mostly of Judah, who are returning to the promised land. I have here a 70 AD and 136 AD. Jerusalem is destroyed again and the Jews are scattered. Most of you know 70 AD, the temple is destroyed, Jerusalem's destroyed. But the Jews weren't completely scattered at that point. They were restricted on where they could go, but there was another rebellion in 136 AD with the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and when that occurred, Rome said, "We're done with you." And they went in and just really wiped them out. And so the Jews were really scattered at that point. And then in the 1900s, for a variety of reasons, Jews all over the world started streaming back to the promised land, and in 1948, the nation of Israel was reborn. So it's almost like windshield washer blades. We're out of the land, we're in the land. We're out of the land, we're in the land. We're out of the land. It seems like this is the promised land. You ought to go there and stay, right? But they did kind of go back and forth. I'm going to put this up here. If you want, you can take a picture of that, or I'll just leave it up here. Vadi Bakum had somebody showed me this, and it's a really good sermon. It is about Joseph, and he didn't call it "Wait, what?" but he could have, because he's telling the story of Joseph from a different perspective. And at the beginning of the sermon, he says, we should look at this story as if we've never read it before and see what surprises us about it. And so it's really kind of interesting that that's exactly what he's talking about. And I was going to show you a little clip of this. We don't have time, and YouTube took it down. I don't know why. So hopefully it'll come back up. But sometimes YouTube will take something down because somebody makes some outrageously ridiculous statement, like there's two genders or marriage should be between a man and a woman. So I don't remember him saying those things in there, but he might have. I think I just got taken down from YouTube. Yeah.
If you know the name of the sermon, we could probably find it.
It's called, I'll put it up next week, okay? Next week we're going to jump out of the Old Testament, go to the New Testament because we got to, because it's week 7. And so we're going to look at the life of Jesus. We'll look at the incarnation. We'll look at the temptation. We'll look at the teachings of Jesus. We'll look at the disciples of Jesus. And that's probably all we're going to be able to do. But we also want to look at the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Have a great week. Thank you for coming.